So we've accepted an offer and we're under contract. Now the deal's not done. Let's talk about what we need to do moving forward. Hi, I'm Terry Bailey with Selling Utah Real Estate. First and foremost, let's make sure we get your seller's disclosures back to the buyer. Part of the under contract process, we talked about the seller's disclosures and the seller's disclosures deadlines. Typically after you're under contract, that can be anywhere between 1 to 100 days, right? But normally it's usually about a week that you get to get these documents back. And it's not just the seller's disclosure documents, which is something your agents just send to you. It's essentially a bunch of questions that they ask about your house. We have to go through and honestly answer them. And yes, you do have to be honest. If they figure out that you've been lying about it, then technically you're in breach of contract and you're in trouble. But at least in our state-approved forms, it's not just that one doc that you have to get back. If you have HOAs, you typically have to take and send a bunch of HOA documents to them that include the budgets and minutes, the CCNRs, and potentially other HOA documents that you need to give there. And if the property is leased, then you have to give those lease agreements to the buyer as per the seller's disclosures. And if you miss any one of those docs, you could be in breach of contract. You might have to pay double the amount of earnest money, right? That's the earnest money times itself. As a buyer's agent, I absolutely love when sellers miss those deadlines. At that point, we have a ton more leverage. And now I don't try to sue anyone or anything like that, but it says, hey, Mr. Seller, you've made a big mistake here. We're gonna be kind and benevolent, but we need you to work with us on X, Y, and Z. And then at that point, the sellers run the risk that if they don't work with them, they could potentially be sued for the total amount of the earnest money. But let's assume we did everything well on that. We're good to go. And we're on to the due diligence period. In the due diligence period, the buyers can technically back out for pretty much whatever reason that they want. And then they usually do an inspection in that time frame. And a lot of times they'll want to come back and negotiate, and then we can negotiate through that time frame. But if they're trying to pull out for a due diligence reason after their due diligence deadline, you really don't have to play ball at that point. And then on to the finance and appraisal deadline. Technically, between the end of the due diligence period and then the end of the finance and appraisal period, the buyer can only back out for finance and appraisal reasons throughout that time frame. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but I do think it's important to talk about some of the intricacies associated with that. And as a seller, I think you should be aware that a lot of buyers, they can still technically back out for almost whatever reason, and then just say, oh yeah, I didn't like the interest rate anymore. Or yeah, I whatever finance and appraisal reason, they can still kind of make that up. And it's hard as a seller to be able to prove that they're actually pulling out for another reason that's not finance and appraisal reason. So I wouldn't plan on their earnest money being non-refundable until after the end of both of those periods. And the last phase in the under contract period is settlement. Make sure that you're able to close on time and that you show up to that. If you miss that deadline, again, you could be in breach of contract and you could be liable for the expenses associated with that transaction if you miss it. Again, typically these things don't happen and typically people want to work with each other and get a deal to work, but it's important to understand some of the risks that could be associated throughout this time frame.